Last time, on Blind Date, Carrie had just arrived at home when he received a phone call from Mandy. He asked her why she never showed up at Phil's. She told him she got caught up. Carrie tells her he tried to call her, but found no listing at all for her name. She gives him an unconvincing story about how her mom uses a different last name sometimes. She asks if they can meet up later that night. She offers to pick Carrie up and just drive around. He agrees and then hangs up the phone with a smile on his face. After he gets off the phone, Carrie's dad tells him the latest news about the car and the cost to fix it. Carrie finally sits down with his dad and tells him everything that's been going on. Tells him about the phone calls, the threats, the fight at the basketball court, everything. He tried to leave out the details of Mandy, but his father questioned him about her too. He tells Lieutenant Hart that they plan to go out that night for a joyride. His father tells him it'd be best if he stayed home and laid low for a while. Carrie was upset to hear that. Shortly after the conversation with his dad, Carrie gets another phone call. This time it was a voice he recognized, a voice he hadn't heard in over a year. It was Donald. He tells Carrie, "Be careful, I'm coming." Carrie panics and hangs up on Donald without thinking about it. He waited for him to call back, but he never did. Carrie wondered what Donald meant by what he said. Why did it sound like a threat? Later that night, Mandy pulled up at Carrie's house in a brand new Firebird. He asked her where she got the car from, but she didn't answer his question. She quickly changed the subject, but he wasn't going to let her off the hook so easily. He asked her again why she never showed up for lunch. But again, Carrie didn't get a straight answer, and the conversation made its way to some playful flirting. As they continued to ride around, Mandy finally tells Carrie why she's been acting so strange lately. She tells him that she thinks someone has been following her around. To Carrie's surprise, she tells him that she thinks Donald is the one following her. Carrie asks why he would be following her. Then Carrie asks her how she knows his brother. She says she never claimed to know Donald, only that she's being followed by him. As they continued talking, Carrie noticed that she had turned onto Sycamore and was driving by Amanda's house. Why did she seem to have a distant, pleased smile on her face? Carrie felt like he was becoming suspicious of everybody and everything. Mandy also tells him that the reason she ran off at the dance was because she thought she saw Donald there, but Carrie found that hard to believe. She told him that she did show up at Phil's, but she ran off again because she thought she saw Donald. Finally, Carrie told Mandy that he ran into Margot and that she didn't know who Mandy was. Before she could reply, Carrie saw the headlights of the oncoming car. The other driver managed to swerve at the last minute, but in that quick flash of light, Carrie's memory came back to him all at once. That night that Mandy died came back to him, and the entire crash played through his mind. Mandy saw a strange look on Carrie's face and asked what was wrong. Carrie didn't know how to explain to Mandy what had just happened, all the memories that just came back to him. He tells her maybe one day he'll explain it, and that it was best if maybe she just took him home. On the way back, Mandy drove back by Amanda's house again. This time he asked her why she took that way home, but she innocently replied, saying that she always goes this way. When Carrie got home, he went straight to his room, but he couldn't fall asleep. He thought more about the night of the accident. He could remember everything prior to the crash, but he knew there was still a piece of the memory missing. The next morning, Carrie was greeted at the kitchen table by his dad. Carrie told him that he was starting to get his memory back. Lieutenant Hart told him he should go talk to his doctor now that it's coming back. It had been a little while since the last time he had seen the doctor. He used to see her 3 times a week for 4 months after the accident. Carrie debated on telling his father about the phone call he got from Donald, but he decided he wouldn't. Lieutenant Hart tells Carrie that the lab results on the car had come in. Not much came up, but they knew that the tires had been cut with a hunting knife and the windows were smashed by some sort of soft hammer or even a mallet. As the week went by, Carrie went and talked to his doctor. She tried to urge Carrie to tell his dad about the phone call from Donald. He felt paranoid, thinking that Donald might come walking around the corner at any minute. He tried talking to Mandy a couple times. She seemed distant, though. Carrie asked her if she still thought she was being followed, and she said yes. On Friday night, Carrie finally told his dad that Donald had called. Lieutenant Hart decided that he didn't want Carrie to stay alone at home. Carrie asked why. His father asked if Carrie remembered exactly what had happened after the crash, after Donald had found out that Amanda was dead. Carrie said no, that part of the memory was still missing. His father tells him that Donald tried to kill him, that Amanda's death was too much for him to handle. He blamed Carrie since he was driving, and that's why he was sent away. Lieutenant Hart decides to have a patrol car ride by every hour to check on the house. He told Carrie to lock up the house, stay put, and do not leave. After his father left, Carrie felt on edge as the night went by. He was startled by the ringing phone. He tried to avoid it, but he couldn't resist. He answers it to hear a frantic Mandy say, "Carrie, you have to help me. I think it's Donald. He's here. In the house." Chapter 17. Her voice still echoed in his ear for a long time after he had hung up. "I can't stay here," she had said, out of breath, talking in a terrified whisper. "I've locked him in the basement. I've got to get away. I'll be right over." And then she had hung up before he could say a word. Had she hung up, or had the line been cut? Of course she hung up, he told himself. Don't start imagining things. Don't start making it worse. How could it be worse? He replaced the receiver on the phone, but he didn't move. He had to think, had to clear his head, had to figure out the best thing to do. At first he was happy Mandy was on her way over to his house. He needed the company. Andy liked the idea of coming to her rescue. But would Mandy be any safer with him? What could the two of them do if Donald was a raging, dangerous lunatic out to get her, or them? "Be careful. I'm coming." And why was Donald chasing after Mandy? What was her connection to Donald? The answer came to Carrie in a flash, a sudden realization that filled him with dread. She had no connection to Donald. Her only connection to Donald was Carrie. Donald was following Mandy because of Carrie. Donald was out to get Mandy because of Carrie. Carrie had killed Donald's girlfriend, and now Donald had come back, had escaped from the mental hospital, and had come back to kill Carrie's girlfriend. Something clattered against the kitchen window, and Carrie's heart leaped into his throat. Carrie cried out surprised, then realized it was probably just an acorn dropping off the tree in the back, or a clump of dried leaves. He walked to the refrigerator on shaky legs and got a Coke. He pulled open the can and took a long drink, telling himself to calm down. "How can I calm down when it's all my fault?" came the answer. Now he felt terribly guilty for the suspicions he had begun to have about Mandy. When she had driven twice past the house on Sycamore Street, it had crossed his mind that she was taking that route deliberately. And then there had been that odd, pleased smile on her face, so mysterious, that smile he had caught on her face the night he regained his memory. But how ridiculous to suspect her. All along he should have suspected himself. Poor Mandy. She was in danger because of him, because of something he had done more than a year before she met him. He made up his mind to protect her, but how? What could he do? He was startled from his thoughts by insistent pounding on the front door. He ran to the front door, began to turn the knob, then hesitated. What if it wasn't Mandy? "Who's there?" "It's me, Mandy. Where were you? I've been knocking on the door for nearly a minute." He pulled open the door. "I'm sorry, I was..." She threw her arms around him and buried her face in his neck. "Carrie, I'm so glad, thank you," she said. Her face felt hot against his neck. He returned her hug. If she only knew the truth, he told himself, she wouldn't be thanking me. "Everything will be okay," he said unconvincingly. He liked having her so close to him, pressing against him like this, but he could feel her fear, feel the desperation in her touch, and it only increased his feelings of guilt. She pulled away suddenly. "Quick," she said, her eyes darting around the small living room. "We can't stay here. He'll be after us." "No," he said, holding her shoulders. "We have to stay. We'll be safe here." "We'll be sitting ducks here," she said, her voice suddenly hard. "We have to get far away, someplace he doesn't know, someplace where he won't be able to find us." "I promised my dad," Carrie said, walking to the sofa, wanting to be away from the window. "He said to stay here." No, we can't." Her eyes were wild with fear that was all his fault. She was pleading with him now. "There's a cabin," she said, following him to the couch. "It's in Granger Forest. Relatives of mine own it, but they're not there now. I have a key. Carrie, listen to me. We'll be safe there. He won't find us." "No, I can't," Carrie started, but he realized she was right. They would be safer away from the house. This house Donald knew so well. He had to try to protect her. It was his fault Donald was chasing her. He had to do something, even if it meant going against his father's wishes. "Okay," he said. "You're right. Let's go." She hugged him again. She seemed so grateful, so desperate. "We'll be safer," she whispered in his ear, her breath hot against his face. and we'll be together. Her lips brushed his cheek. I'll call my dad, he stammered. Then we'll go. Hurry, please, she said, her voice tiny like a little girl's. Dad won't like it, he said, but he'll realize it's the safest plan. He picked up the receiver and started to dial. Hey, he cried in surprise. No dial tone. It's silent. Dead. The surprise turned to fear. Oh my God, she cried. We've got to get out of here. I'll be back in 2 seconds, he said, dropping the dead phone receiver to the floor. He ran upstairs and pulled his backpack from the closet. He stuffed a few shirts and other clothes into it, grabbing them from his dresser drawer without looking. Then he came running down the steps. Okay, let's make tracks. You sound like a bad movie, she said. I wish it was a movie, he muttered as they stepped outside. The night was colder than he had thought. His breath steamed, and he shivered from the surprise chill. Mandy opened the trunk to the Firebird. Throw your pack in here, she said, her eyes surveying the trees warily. She was shivering, too. The trunk was filled with camping gear, a canvas tent, fishing poles, a tackle box, an overnight bag, and a long wooden mallet. Carrie felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. Mandy, he called. She was already climbing into the driver's seat. What? Hurry, will you? Mandy, this mallet. What's it for? What? Frowning, she came running to the back of the car. What's the problem? What's this mallet for? I didn't put it there. It's my dad's. You know, for pounding in tent pegs. Come on, Carrie. What's the matter with you? Let's go. Again, the guilty feelings. Why was he so suspicious? How could he suspect this poor, frightened girl? Shaking his head, he climbed in beside her. She started the car and floored it, and they sped off down the hill. Maybe we'll use the mallet, she said suddenly, eyes on the curving road. We'll pitch a tent in the woods. That'll be romantic. And cold, he said, still shivering. I'll keep you warm, she whispered, squeezing his hand and giving him a sexy smile. She wore an oversized gray sweatshirt over jeans. He realized it was the first time he had seen her dressed like a normal person. He smiled back. She looked terrific. He was beginning to warm up to the idea of being out in the woods in a cabin alone with her. The highway became a road. The road became a gravel path. The gravel gave way to dirt. It's right up there, hidden behind the tall pine trees, she said, her bright headlights cutting through the dark, frosty air, illuminating a thick tangle of pines and oaks and white-barked cedars that seemed to jump out at the car. The cold wind howled. Tree branches bent and shuddered. Fat brown leaves blew up against the windshield as they made their way slowly up the twisting dirt path towards the hidden cabin. Are you sure you know where you're going? Carrie said. No, she said. She smiled. Does it really matter? She seemed less nervous out here, surrounded by the shifting, blowing darkness. She smiled easily again, and her voice had regained its purr. Carrie, you look so cold. I didn't realize. I should have brought my... We'll get a roaring fire going in the fireplace. We'll be cozy and warm before you know it. She dropped a hand to his thigh and let it rest there for a while. I'll make you glad you rescued me, she said softly, her eyes on the narrow, twisting path ahead. Carrie smiled. This may turn out to be a memorable week, he told himself. Suddenly, she stopped the car. We're here. She climbed out of the car and walked up to the cabin door. He stood at the car and watched her struggle with the key. Finally, she managed to get the door open. She disappeared inside, and a few seconds later, a bright lamp went on outside the cabin door, and a few lights inside the cabin came to life. The cabin was surrounded by tall weeds and overgrown grass that was more than knee-high. It appeared no one had tended to it in quite a long while. In the light, Carrie could see it was pretty large, 2 or 3 bedrooms probably, built of logs and wide slats of pine, weathered and very worn down looking. One of the side windows was cracked and had been covered with a sheet. A 4-legged animal of some sort, probably a raccoon or a mole, scampered away as Carrie walked up to the front door. The animal startled him, and he nearly tripped over a clump of tangled weeds. It looks pretty good inside, Mandy said, appearing suddenly at the doorway, looking pale, almost ghostly in the yellow light from the cabin lamp. There's even some canned food in the pantry. Nothing great, but we won't starve. Carrie shivered. Let's unpack the trunk, he said. I'm freezing. He couldn't stop shivering now. Was it just the cold? She leaned over and gave him a quick, warm kiss on the cheek. I know some good ways to warm you up, she said, teasing. Before he could react, she ran to the car trunk and reached into her jean pockets for the key, He walked carefully through the overgrown weeds to help her unload. "What was that?" she cried, grabbing his arm tightly. They heard footsteps, crunching, a twig cracking a few 100 yards away in the trees. "Animals, I guess," Carrie said, trying to hide his own fear. "It's their forest, you know." "But do they have to walk around so loudly?" she asked, lifting her suitcase from the trunk. After they got all their belongings inside, Carrie looked for the phone. "I've got to reach my dad," he told her. "Otherwise they'll have the entire police force going nuts." The kitchen was small, but fully equipped with an electric stove and oven, a refrigerator, even a dishwasher. It was wallpapered, a hideous yellow and pink flower design, faded and peeling at the ceiling corners. The phone was an old-fashioned black one, at the corner of the stained Formica kitchen counter. Carrie picked it up and began to dial. Silence. The phone was dead. "No dial tone," he told her. "Oh, gee," she said, looking very concerned. "I'm sorry. They probably have it turned off. No one uses the cabin much after the summer." Carrie shivered. "It's almost as cold inside as out," he said angrily. "Is there a town nearby, someplace I can call from?" She shrugged. "I don't know. I'm a tourist here too, you know." Carrie began to pace back and forth in the tiny kitchen. "Now what am I going to do?" he asked. "You're going to get firewood so we can warm this place up," Mandy said softly, trying to soothe him. "We'll get a nice fire going, and I'll make us big steaming cups of hot chocolate." "That sounds okay," he said, still thinking about how he was going to call his dad. "It'll be more than okay. You'll see," she purred. "Then we'll stay up all night, telling each other our problems and our life stories and other stuff." He smiled despite his mood. "That other stuff sounds interesting," he said. She pushed him toward the door. "There's a small shed out in the back," she told him. "There always used to be a big pile of firewood next to the shed. Go see. Bring back a lot. It's a big fireplace, and I love a big fire." He clumped outside. The cold stung his face. Tall weeds brushed his jeans as he made his way around the cabin, sending small animals scurrying, his socks wet from the frost, turning his left ankle in a small hole as he tried to walk. There was no light in the back. He waited for his eyes to adjust. He could make out the dark outline of a low shed and headed toward it. An animal howled in the distance, another picking up its cry. "What am I doing here?" he asked himself. "A few hours ago, I was in my warm house, in front of the TV, safe and, well, he wasn't safe. Now, at least, he was with Mandy and far away from Donald." He took a deep breath. The air was cold, but fresh. Things could be worse, he thought. If only he could reach his dad. There was a stack of firewood, neatly cut and piled by the side of the shed. He cradled 4 logs in his arms and started to the cabin with them. They were frost-covered, but they would burn. He wondered if there was any kindling. Mandy was at the stove, stirring a pot with a wooden spoon. He stumbled at the entrance, nearly spilling the logs across the kitchen floor. "Very gracefully done," she said and laughed. "I get the feeling you're not the outdoors type." "Oh, I go outdoors all the time," Carrie said, brightening a little at her good humor. "Whenever I'm not indoors, I'm usually outdoors." "Go put the logs in the fireplace," she said in a mocking, scolding tone. "If that's the level of conversation we're going to have, it's going to be a long night." She laughed again. "You certainly got in a good mood," he said. The remark seemed to startle her. "Oh, well, I guess it's being with you." She turned back to her stirring. The other room was used as a living room and a dining room. The wide fireplace, which had been swept clean and didn't appear to have been used recently, took up most of the far wall. A small dining room table of painted oak stood in front of the fire, with 4 wooden chairs around it. A couch with 1 torn cushion stood against one wall. A moose head with only 1 antler was hung at a tilt above the couch. Not the most luxurious, Carrie told himself. If there's no kindling, I can always use the dining room chairs, or the moose head. He found a basket of sticks to the right of the fireplace, and he set to work building the fire. A few moments later, he stepped back proudly. A few of the sticks had caught fire. The fireplace soon began to crackle and glow. The logs sizzled, then smoked, then finally low flames began to nip and flare around the edges. "Not exactly a roaring blaze," Mandy said, smiling, setting down 2 large gray mugs on the small dining room table in front of the fire. Give it time," Carrie said. "In a few minutes, I promise, This place will be a raging inferno." Again, Mandy seemed startled by his remark. She gave him a curious look, then quickly tried to cover it with a smile. "Sit down," she said, pointing to his mug, which she had placed across from her on the table. "Drink this. It'll warm you." "Smells great," Carrie said, sitting down. The chair was hard and cold. He looked to the fire. "Not bad. It's getting there," he said. "It'll warm the entire room," she said, "once it gets going." She sipped her hot chocolate. Nice and hot. Carrie sipped his. It burned his tongue, but he didn't mind. He just wanted to get warm. "Good," he said. They looked at each other across the table. He suddenly felt very shy. "I don't believe it," he thought to himself. "I'm going to spend the night with this girl." He took another hot gulp of the chocolatey drink. It's going to be a very nice fire," Mandy said, staring at the flickering orange and yellow flames. Something popped, shooting bright red sparks against the fireplace screen. "This is just how I imagined it." Carrie took a long drink of hot chocolate. He was beginning to feel warmer. "Imagined what?" he said quietly, becoming hypnotized by the flickering flames and their darting shadows. "What?" "You said this is exactly how you imagined it." "I did?" She seemed embarrassed. "Yes, you did," Carrie insisted. "I don't really know what I meant. Fires always make me a bit dreamy," she said, reaching across the table and taking his hand. "It's such a shame, Carrie." She was really confusing him now. What was a shame? "Are you feeling okay?" he asked. "Sure," she said, still holding his hand. "Now that you're here with me, everything's going to be fine." "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I guess," he said. His back itched. He suddenly felt too warm. "The fire gives off a lot of heat, doesn't it?" he said, pulling off his sweater and tossing it onto the couch. He took another long sip of the hot chocolate. "I told you I'd get you nice and warm," she said softly. "Good hot chocolate," he said, thinking about her hand, which still held on to his. "It's an old family recipe," she said, "right from the envelope." "You haven't told me much about your family," Carrie said, and he tried to cover a yawn with his hand. "You don't want to hear about my family. You're yawning already," she teased, squeezing his hand. "No, really, I do." He yawned again. "I suddenly feel so sleepy. I'm sorry. I guess it's the change from being so cold to being so warm. Are you hot too?" She laughed. "Am I hot? Don't be crude. I thought you wanted to hear about my family." His head felt heavy. It was hard to keep his eyes open. He looked into the fire. So warm, so silent, so peaceful. "You look so sleepy." "Poor baby," Mandy said. She leaned across the table, lowered her head, and kissed the back of his hand. "Poor, poor baby." "I'm not really." Carrie's eyes closed. He struggled to open them. He could hear Mandy's voice. She was saying, "Poor, poor baby," over and over again, he thought. But she sounded miles away. Miles and miles. The fire had turned gray. What happened to the flames? It was still burning hot, but he couldn't see the flames. Only gray. Only gray. He was falling into a gray sleep. Catch me, Mandy," he thought. But she was miles and miles away. Poor baby. He woke up slowly, groggily. His head was as heavy as a rock. He saw that the fire had burned low, the blackened logs still hissing over gray ashes. His back ached. He realized he was still sitting at the small dining room table. His head ached. He reached. He tried to stand up, but he couldn't. The fact that he couldn't woke him up. He saw that his hands were tied behind him with a thick coil of rope. He tried to kick away from the chair, but his ankles were tied together, and his feet were tied tightly to the chair legs. "Poor baby," Mandy said, standing across the table. Her dark purple lips were spread wide across her pale face in a grin. Her pale blue eyes, normally so flat and unrevealing of any emotion, sparkled with life. "Poor baby," she said, "you're awake." Chapter 18. "Wake up, Carrie, wake up. This is the worst dream yet," he told himself. "It's all perfectly real," Mandy said, reading his thoughts, enjoying his struggles to free himself. "Don't pull like that. You'll cut your wrist." "Mandy, come off it. What's the big idea? What the hell do you think you're doing?" "It's just the way I imagined it," she said, smiling.
She raised her hands excitedly and tugged at the sides of her hair. I can't believe it. I can't either, Carrie said, still struggling. Untie me. This isn't funny. Not funny? Of course it's funny, Carrie dear. And it's going to get a lot funnier. What do you think you're doing? Could you just explain to me? It's perfect. Perfect, she said, clapping her hands. I don't want to start. I just want to look at you like this. But I have to. I have to. Have to what? Carrie screamed angrily. Why, finish what I've started, she said, as if the answer was obvious. How did you do this to me? Carrie asked. I put a little white powder in your hot chocolate. How else? You're being very dumb, Carrie. Dumb? I'm being dumb? This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. Mandy, untie me. I'm sorry, she said, still smiling broadly. I have to finish. Finish what? Are you going to explain to me? It's taken so long, she said dreamily, not hearing his yells of protest. I've worked so hard. Worked? What? Let me go. He gave the ropes a powerful tug, and then screamed as they cut into his skin. He slumped back in the chair. He decided not to struggle anymore. This is a bad joke, Mandy. I know you like to think you're impulsive and weird and everything, but... Weird? Her eyes flared angrily, and she stormed back and forth, staring furiously at him. I'm not weird. Don't ever say I'm weird, Carrie. Don't ever say that. He had to laugh. Okay, fine. You're not weird. What's weird about taking a person out to a cabin in the forest, drugging him, and tying him to a chair? Perfectly normal. Shut up, she screamed, spitting the words at him, her face suddenly reddening with hatred. Do you want me to explain? Okay, maybe this will explain the situation to you. She put her fingers to her nose and pinched her nose tight. Then in a harsh, distorted voice, a voice Carrie knew well, she said, the toe bone's connected to the foot bone. The foot bone's connected to the ankle bone. No, Carrie screamed. It was you. You made all those phone calls. Give the boy a gold star, she said quietly, her eyes narrowing to slits of hatred. She turned her back as if she couldn't bear to look at him anymore. But why, Mandy? Why? The ankle bone's connected to the leg bone. The leg bone's connected to the knee bone, she said furiously, her voice distorted by hatred. She began to pace back and forth again, faster and faster. It was as if the excitement was too much for her to bear in one place. Mandy, everything else? The red paint in my locker? The slashed tires? She laughed and turned to look at him. You catch on quick, Carrie, baby. Not quick enough, though. He stared into her laughing face. She didn't look like the same person. Her eyes were wild. She had pulled her hair out at the sides so that it stood up as if electrified. He tried to think of what to do, what to say to her to get her to release him. He had to get free. She looked crazy enough to do anything. Mandy, he said quietly, sit down. Tell me why you're angry. Let's discuss this like... She walked up to him and stuck her face right in front of his so that their noses touched. The toe bone's connected to the knee bone. The knee bone's connected to the neck bone. The neck bone's connected to the broken bone. She laughs. Then she grabs his head. He tried to turn away, but he couldn't. She pressed her lips against his, harder and harder, until he could feel the blood trickling down his chin. Then she stood up straight and slapped his face. Time to start, she said, sounding perfectly calm again. Mandy, please. She disappeared from his view. He strained against the ropes, but they held tight. When she reappeared, she was carrying the long wooden mallet. Time to keep my promise, she said quietly, almost absent-mindedly. She was there holding the mallet, yet Carrie could see that she was also somewhere else, her mind a million miles away. You're nuts, nuts, he screamed, regretting it immediately. Anger flared in her eyes again. Yell all you want. I'll enjoy it, she said, and smiled a bitter smile. Boy, oh boy, will I enjoy it. I'm sorry, Carrie said desperately. Really, I didn't mean it. Let's talk, Mandy, please. You and I, together, we can... Yes, together, she said softly. But first I have to keep my promise. What on earth are you talking about? What promise? To break every bone in your body. She raised the mallet to her shoulder. It was heavy, and she had difficulty balancing it. One by one, every bone, each and every one. But, Mandy, Carrie could see that she was deadly serious. Why? At least tell me why." She walked over to him again, the mallet balancing precariously on her narrow shoulder. She stared down at him, the almost irisless blue eyes burning into his, her face aflame, her hair wild about her head. "Carrie, you mean you don't know?" "No? Know what?" There was a long, long pause. Then she said, "Amanda was my sister." Chapter 19. Amanda's sister? Carrie was practically shrieking. His heart pounded. Sweat poured down his forehead, even though the fire had died and the room had chilled. "That's impossible. I don't remember." "You don't remember much, do you?" She screamed the words into his face. He tried to grab her, but of course he couldn't. She pulled back, her dark purple mouth twisted in hate. "It was so convenient for you not to remember, wasn't it, Carrie? But I remember. I remember everything. It was an accident. You seem to have a lot of accidents, poor baby. Oh, how my family suffered because of your accident. How I suffered. And you slime, you got off scot-free, didn't you? And how did you get off scot-free?" "Scot-free? Because your old man was a cop. You got off without even a trial. Well, trial time has come, Carrie, baby. I vowed I'd get justice for my sister. I vowed I'd break every bone in your body, just the way you broke hers. Now listen, I'm sure my father didn't do anything to..." Carrie realized she wasn't listening. She was beyond listening. She dropped the mallet to the floor and kneeled down in front of Carrie. He kicked at her, but his foot was tied too tightly to move. She grabbed his left leg. "Hey, what are you..." She pulled off his left shoe. Then she grabbed the other leg and pulled off his right shoe. Breathing heavily, she pulled off his socks, her fingernails scratching his legs as she pulled them down, and tossed them into the fireplace. She stood up and retrieved the mallet. "Let's start with the toe bones and work up," she said quietly. She raised the mallet. "No," Carrie pleaded. "Please, no." She cried out as she brought the mallet down with all of her might. This time, the sound of the cracking bone was Carrie's. He screamed, a howl that poured out of him, a howl that wouldn't stop. The pain started at the toes of his left foot and shot up his left side. Pain that made him howl. Pain that closed his eyes, that tightened every muscle, that paralyzed him until he was nothing. Nothing but a howl, a terrified, agonized howl. When he opened his eyes, she was raising the mallet again. "Poor baby," she said, emotionless. "Something bad happened to your toes. Let's see what we can do to the other foot, okay?" He couldn't talk, not even to plead with her. He couldn't move. He closed his eyes as she raised the mallet off her shoulder. The pain was overwhelming. His foot had become a throbbing, aching knot of pain. Now she was about to do the same to his other foot. "What's wrong, Carrie?" she called in that mocking, falsely sympathetic voice. "Can't bear to look? Okay. You caught me in a good mood." She reached up over the sofa and with great effort pulled the one-antlered moose head off the wall. She ripped the head from the base and frantically scooped out the hunks of stuffing. "No!" Carrie managed to scream. His foot throbbed, but the pain had subsided enough for him to get his voice back. "Mandy, no!" She jammed the moose head over Carrie's head and pulled it down over him. It smelled of mildew and decay. He gasped. He tried to hold his breath. He twisted his head from side to side, but the moose head was pulled down securely over him, burying him in darkness and its foul odor. "You look adorable," she said. "I wish I had a camera." She laughed. He could hear the scrape of the mallet against the wood floor as she picked it up. He didn't have to see to know what she was about to do next. She was about to slam the mallet down on his other bare foot. The toe bones connected to the head bone, and the head bones connected to the moose bone. He could hear her singing through the disgusting animal head. He shut his eyes. He tried to hold his breath. He could feel a powerful wave of nausea rise up from his stomach. "Okay, Carrie, baby. Here it comes," she said happily. Chapter 20. His stomach churning, his head reeling, he waited in the darkness of the disgusting animal head, waited for the second explosion of pain. Something crawled across his forehead. "It's just sweat, he told himself. But he knew it was an insect. The moose head was probably crawling with insects. He felt as if he was about to pass out, as if he was slipping away.
A loud crash revived him. It sounded like the door bursting open. "No! Go away!" he heard Mandy yell. He heard sounds of a scuffle, feet scraping against the wooden floor, bodies colliding with furniture. "Go away! Go away!" Mandy kept yelling, her voice a shriek in the distance on the other side of the odorous animal head. Was it Donald? Had Donald caught up to them? Had Donald come to finish off the job she had started? He strained against the ropes with new desire to escape, but it was of no use. Chairs overturned. The mallet clunked to the floor. The fireplace utensils clanged and clattered to the floor with a metallic crash. "Get away from me! Go away!" "Stop it, Nancy! Just stop!" A masculine voice, out of breath from the struggle, cried out. Was it Donald? He couldn't tell. The sound was muffled through the heavy moose head. His forehead itched like crazy. Hundreds of little feet were walking across it. Nancy. He couldn't have heard right. "Let me finish," Mandy was screaming. "Let me take care of him." "I'll take care of him," the masculine voice insisted. Yes, it sounded like Donald. They were fighting over which one of them got to mallet him to a pulp. Dishes crashed. Something heavy smashed against a window. He could hear the shatter of glass. More scuffling feet. "Nancy, stop. I'll take care of him. Stop. I don't want to hurt you." "Get away, get away, get away." Then he heard her utter a cry of pain. He heard a body hit the floor. Silence. Then footsteps. Coming toward him. Someone was standing in front of him. He could feel a warm presence. He waited. He wanted to cry out, but he waited. Someone was standing there, standing over him, watching him. Someone lifted the moose head. The light was blinding white. The air was cold against his hot, wet skin. "Donald!" Carrie cried. "Happy Halloween," Donald said quietly. He still held the moose head in one hand. In the other hand, he held the mallet. In the light of the cabin, his brother looked older. His eyes seemed to have narrowed, and they were circled with dark rings. He stood stooped, his head at a low angle, bone thin, his blond hair cut short. Donald stared down at him, the mallet at his side. He dropped the moose head to the floor and kicked it aside. This is it, Carrie thought. Donald's big moment. He's waited a year for his revenge, and now he's about to get it. Carrie looked away and saw Mandy laying face down in front of the fireplace. He knocked her out of the way so he could get to me, Carrie thought. Donald raised the mallet. Carrie sucked in his breath. Donald tossed the mallet aside. "Looks like you've been leading an interesting life, Care," he said, a smile slowly breaking across his face, crinkling his tired eyes. "Donald, I'm sorry," Carrie blurted out. "You're sorry," Donald said softly. "I'm the one who's sorry, Care. I had no idea she'd go this far. Really. Is she... Carrie looked over at the unmoving body of Mandy. "I gave her a light tap," Donald said. "She'll be okay." He knelt down and began to untie the ropes around Carrie's ankles. "My foot," Carrie said. The throbbing pain was almost unbearable. "Looks like you've got some broken toes," Donald said, untying the last knot. "I'm sorry. I tried to catch up with her. I tried to get to her in time. But each time she managed to get away." He began to rub Carrie's leg to get the circulation going. "I don't get it," Carrie said, his head spinning. "I wanted to catch her in a tranquil situation," Donald said, shaking his head. "I thought I could talk to her, reason with her, but I was wrong. I'm sorry, Care. I'm real sorry. This was all my fault. I called you. I tried to warn you about her, but you hung up on me. It was an accident, Donald. I didn't mean to. Why didn't you call back?" Donald frowned. His eyes became sad slits. "I thought maybe you and Dad didn't want to hear from me. After I nearly killed you last year, I thought maybe you didn't want me bothering you. You see, I have a lot to be sorry about, so I tried to take care of it on my own. I tried to stop her without troubling anybody. I almost did, too. Almost." He got one hand untied. Carrie tried to lift it, but the entire arm was tingling and numb. Donald went to work on the second hand. "You mean that Mandy..." Carrie began struggling to make sense of things. "Her name isn't Mandy," Donald said, surprised. "She told you her name was Mandy? Man, oh man." He whistled. A whistle of surprise. He always whistled. A whistle Carrie hadn't heard in over a year. "That's what I used to call Amanda. Her name is Nancy. Nancy Kelly." "I don't believe it," Carrie said, the feeling beginning to return to his arm. Next you're going to tell me that I'm not Carrie. I'm Murray Peterson from Nome, Alaska. Yeah, that's right, Donald said. And I'm the Great Pumpkin. Carrie grimaced as Donald untied the last tight knot around his wrist. He didn't even try to move the hand. The entire arm was numb. How can she be Amanda's sister if her name is Nancy Kelly? Carrie asked. She isn't Amanda's sister, Donald told him with a bitter frown. She only thinks she is. But she told me... Carrie stopped. He didn't know what to say, but his mind was flooded with a million questions all at once. She thinks she's Amanda's sister, Donald said softly. She really believes it. Nancy's a very sick girl. I didn't realize how sick, I guess. I should have stopped her sooner. I shouldn't have risked her getting hurt. I shouldn't have... Shouldn't have what? Carrie insisted. Shouldn't have told her the whole story about me and Amanda, and you, and the accident. But what else was I going to talk about up in that hospital? You mean she was there too? Carrie asked. Yeah, she's been there most of her life, poor kid. She's had several different identities, none of them her own. She hides in other people's lives. She becomes other people. I told her all about the accident, why I was in the hospital, everything. I even told her about the cabin that Amanda's parents own. She remembered everything, Donald continued. She absorbed everything I told her, and I guess she just moved into the story, took a part for herself, became Amanda's sister. I was an idiot. I was lonely, so I talked to her. I told her too much. When she escaped from the hospital, I knew where she was going, what she was going to do. I knew it. So you decided to go after her? Carrie asked, staring up at his brother. I knew I could talk to her, bring her back safely, Donald replied, looking over at Nancy's unmoving body. So I waited till the right moment and got away. It's okay. The doctors will understand when I explain. I was going to be released in a few days anyway. So, I came after her. I knew she'd be staying with a friend who lives near town. I was determined to reason with her, to bring her back safely. The whole thing was my fault. I almost got to her tonight, Care, but she heard me and locked me in the basement. As Donald continued his explanation, his face filled with concern and regret, Carrie saw Nancy begin to move. She struggled to her feet, her eyes filled with hatred. She grabbed the mallet and lurched toward Donald. Did Donald see her? No, he had his back to her. He was still staring intently at Carrie, still explaining, still apologizing. Donald didn't know she was about to attack him. Only Carrie knew. Carrie didn't think his numb legs could move, but he had to try. With a desperate effort, he hurtled out of the chair, stumbled forward on aching legs, and threw himself onto Nancy. The mallet flew from her hand. Donald spun around, surprised, and stumbled backward. He killed my sister! He killed my sister! Nancy screamed over and over. Carrie grabbed Nancy and tried to hold her still, but she attacked him with her fists, pounding his chest wildly, furiously, screaming and crying. He held her by the shoulders, letting her pound him until her blows became weak. She uttered a low cry and collapsed to the floor. Poor kid, Donald muttered, looking over at her. His foot throbbing, Carrie hopped back to the wooden chair. That was a nice tackle, Care, Donald said. Maybe you should try out for defense. You know, tackle or linebacker or something. I don't want to talk about football, Carrie groaned. They heard sirens in the distance. A few seconds later, the cabin was invaded by bright white headlights. The sirens were right outside. Here comes the cavalry to the rescue, Donald said. You mean... Carrie started in surprise. I called Dad just before I came after you. Told him I was headed up here following you. Looks like we're about to have a happy family reunion. Carrie smiled. He even forgot about his shattered foot for a few seconds. Donald picked up the moose head and tossed it at Carrie. Here, Carrie, quick. Put this back on. Dad has such a dull life. Let's give him a thrill. A few days later, Carrie was heading out of school, struggling with his crutches, his arms aching from pulling and pushing them. He bumped into Sal Murdoch on his crutches. Copycat, Sal snarled. Get a horse, Carrie replied. It wasn't too original, but it got a laugh out of Sal. Hey Gimp, over here, a voice called. It was Josh, gesturing to Carrie on the sidewalk in front of the main entrance. Carrie hurried over to him as best he could, getting his right leg tangled in his right crutch and nearly falling face forward onto the walk. I thought maybe you could carry my books for me, Josh said. Very funny, Carrie growled. kicking at Josh with his good foot. Want a lift? Sure, Carrie said. Well, don't look at me. You know I don't have a car. You're a million laughs today, Josh, Carrie said, leaning on his crutches. Don't you ever get tired of that joke? Don't you ever get tired of falling for it? Well, listen, Carrie, I wonder if you could do me a favor. No way, Carrie said, grinning. Well, my cousin Sarah is coming to town this weekend. She isn't fabulous or anything, but she's a good kid, and she's kind of pretty. I think you might like her. I was wondering if maybe you'd like to... I don't believe this, Carrie said, raising a crutch in the air as if to brain Josh with it. A blind date? Are you seriously suggesting a blind date? Well, Josh backed away. I see your point. Guess not. Sorry about that. Some other time. Sorry. He turned and started running down the block. Hey, wait, Josh. Carrie propelled himself after Josh, hopping on one leg, raising and lowering the crutches in front of him. Wait, not so fast. Let's discuss this. How pretty did you say she was? The end.